The students of the SLW616 for the blended mode of teaching, the law and economics, Karibu Sana, welcome to my class. Participants, anyone can unmute and read what I posted on the screen. Participants, anyone can unmute and read that what I posted on the screen. Anyone? That is the gallows and a nose of rope for the hanged to death. That was there. Of course, hosted by the Professor Dr. Mohammed Saheb, Professor of Law, School of Law, and Malimbe Monza, Tanzania, East Africa. Then the WhatsApp number and mobile number is also given for your understanding, for your easy way. So without wasting the time, let me go to our study that what we left in our last class up to the strict mark here, which is given. Two factors have caused the major expansion of the product liability. One was the finding the relatively strict liability for design defects, and in addition to that manufacturing defects, there are three types of the product liability defects are there. Number one, design defect. Number two, manufacturing defect. Number three, marketing defect. These three defects are there. The other was the expansion of the liability for the failure to warn, that is the marketing defect. One result of the treating this event as a part of the tort law is that injured parties can collect classes of damages, payments such as damages for pain and suffering, and sometimes excessive punitive damages, which is also said as a damages in terrorism, and would be excluded by the contract if contracts could be enforced. So some of the thing where the negligence part is emerged over there, then it is not out of the contract, as it is not independent of the contract. It is out of the contract. The tort has emerged over there. As a result, the price of the many goods and services, including the medical services, are driven above the value of the consumers could place on them. That is why, for example, private airplanes are so expensive, and obstetricians and gynecologists are unavailable in some markets. So what I want to say is, in the plane also, whenever a person is traveling, there would be a medical doctor would be available over there, generally who comes to the rescue when any ill health would be there in the plane. So if you see the chart, there are many factors are there to count whether the chart is basically it will be there or not. Let us see that here. Economic charts lecture, and just tort law recognize that one can negatively affect a person or their property through either negligence or intent. The tort law also provides a framework for the dealing with the negligent or intentional acts done against a person's business or livelihood. See, anywhere at any time the tort will be committed, then it is merely on the basis of the negligence and the amount of the negligence. The tort claim would be the various. Indeed, if these were not in place, a malicious actor could satisfy themselves with the destroying an individual financially, whereas leaving their persons and property untouched. So if you go further, we can understand how the economic tort will be measured and how a damages will be awarded. We will see it now. The economic torts can be split into two primary categories. Number one, procuring a breach of a contract, sometimes found under the heading of a wrongful interference with the pre-existing right, and causing loss by unlawful means. These are the two ways. Number one, the wrongful interference with the pre-existing right. Then the next one is by unlawful means. Conspiracy is also discussed below, and whereas this is a separate tort, it can generally be regarded as the ancillary to the two primary torts of inducing a breach of unlawful interference. In essence, conspiracy just involves an agreement to a group to commit one of the primary torts. The exam consideration is, since the economic torts often involve the contracts and you will need a working knowledge of how contract law operates, before you can confidently deal with the problem questions. Generally, when you say the contract, it is the agreement between the two parties. Of course, there are essential of the contract should be fulfilled over there, and then no one is a minor, and everybody is sound mind, and lawful object, and their consideration, and all these essential ingredients was there. Then we can say it is a contract. Nevertheless. Remember that a taught law essay or exam answers will be marked on the basis of your taught knowledge. So don't get too hung up on the peripheral contract law issues. Before continuing, it is worth noting an important point: unless a breach of a contract is induced or an unlawful act occurs, no economic tort will be occurred. There should be a breach of a contract that should be induced or an unlawful act occurs, and then only we can see the economic tort will have occurred. Harsh business practices don't form the basis of a tort. See, the harsh business practices will not come under the economic tort. This can be seen in the Mughal Steamship Company Limited versus McGregor Governed Company, that is Queen's Bench Division 598. The claimants were driven out of their market because Chinese sea shipping by the defendant, a group of the merchants who offered much more favorable terms to their Chinese contacts. The court rejected a claim for the economic tort. The negative effect on the claimant was the side effect rather than an end of the defendant action. The exception to this rule is conspiracy to injure, discussed below, but even this exception is rarely applied. See, the competition is always allowed in the market. Suppose if any company will ship the one place to another place through the ship, of course, that company has made a lower price. By that one, the other company has suffered a lot. Economic factor is emerged over there. That company is supposed to be closed because of the financial constraints, and that company filing a case against another company. Then they say there will not be any harm done because in the business competition is allowed. So they want, if they can lower the price, and they will ship it also. It is according to their low margin rate. The court rejected the claim of economic tort in this case law because even though he suffered a financial loss, the negative effect on the claimant was a side effect rather than the end of the defendant's action. The exception to the rule conspiracy to injure the discussed below, but even this exception rarely applied. So sometimes it will be the conspiracy to injure the other person because they form a lobby and they will try to defeat one of the party by the conspiracy, but such a thing will be rarely used over there. The reason is the competition is always allowed in the market. Inducing a breach of contract. The contract from the backbone of the business operations. A given organization will have a multiple contract with the business, with provided with stocks and raw materials, and everyone who provides services to it will be contracted to do so. So, in the business, contract is the backbone. From the part-time employee in the post room up to the CEO. So each and every one of its customers will create a contract, whatever they deal with the organization. Even if these contracts are not in a traditional paper form, if these contracts are not fulfilled, as each said promises they will, this can have severe and unanticipated negative effects for both the parties. If you see the further, consider a car manufacturer with an order to fill. If a steel supplier suddenly refuses to meet its contractual obligation to supply, then the manufacturer will suddenly find itself unable to manufacture the promised cars. This will have a knock-on effects on its stock and all of the employees it has employed. Indeed, if a given business from a significant enough proportion of a given national economy, a singular breach of a contract can be disastrous. So, in such a things, if any one of the incident happened, they could not supply the cars, and it is having the high impact on the economy, and the most of the people will be suffered, and the GDP also will not be increased because of the stoppage of the cars. Yeah, not supplying the cars within time because some raw material will not be supplied within time to manufacture the cars. Contract law has developed its own mechanism to deal with the steel supplier, but if the third party has been the one to pursue a steel supplier to deny the promised steel, for example, by offering a bribe, they will largely be untouchable in the contract since they were not party to the steel party contract. This is where the tort law steps in to provide a course of action against the third party for pursuing the supplier to breach its contract. If any other person has induces the another person to make a breach of a contract, and at the time that he would be liable. So let us see the exam consideration is concerned, although the induction can come in the form of the better offer, it would be a mistake to regard this as the only form of inducement. Induction can come in the form of the threat or in the form of the simply deliberately creating the conditions which stop a contract from being carried out. So, a root of the tort can be found in the Lumley versus Guy case law. What is the root of the tort? And the case law in focus is Lumley versus Gay and the 1853 case law. And then the claimant had contracted for the services of an opera singer. So there is a opera will be there most famous in the Australia. The defendant then offered a pay the opera singer a higher fee to sing his theatre instead of. So when the contract was made, and this opera singer will be paid more, inducing her to make a breach of contract with the earlier and make a contract with the new one. Whilst an action existed against the singer for the breach of a contract, the court held that an action also existed against the defendant for the tort of inducing a breach of a contract. See, another party may induce for a breach of a contract. Notably, the court discussed that under the contract, the damage must be the damages must be limited in a way which would mean they fail to properly reflect the claimant's harm. They thus found it just and under the principle of the full compensation to create an action under the inducer. So, contract of inducement where the economic benefit will be there for the other party, but there is a substantial loss to the done to that party which agreed earlier. At that instant, they can ask for the total amount plus the interest or the mesne profits also. The tort requires a malice. Whether malice is necessary or not, of course, sometimes malice will not be taken into consideration because the act itself is enough. It should be noted that the tort requires the malice on the part of the defendant rather than the active hostility. This refers to the concurrence of the two things. Number one, the defendant must know that they are suffering the discharge of another contract and they must intend to do so. Thus, a defendant who unknowingly offers a better contract to a third party, then the third party, then the one they are already in, it will not be liable. So, regarding the intention is concerned, the defendant who carelessly causes another to breach their contract will not suffice, as in a cattle versus Stockton Waterworks Company Limited 1975, the Q's bench 453. The defendant maintained a water pipe. The pipe sprung a leak and flooded some land. The claimant was determined to build a tunnel and preventing him from fulfilling their contractual obligations. Since this was a matter of the carelessness on the part of the criminals rather than the malice, no liability may arise when under the head of the inducing breach. So, under the head of the inducing breach, it can be calculated and damages fully paid. Intention does not need to be particularly concerted, and it will suffice if a defendant knowingly create a risk of a breach being induced. Even if they are indifferent as to whether the breach is actually made or not. So these are the economic factors should be there in the chart where you can measure the damages in terms of the economic chart and which is feasible, which is not feasible. So that would be studying in this our class. This is important since there are certain contract exemptions, terms which allow a party to not to follow through with their obligations while still not technically breaching the contract as long as certain circumstances were fulfilled. For example, see force majeure terms. If the law did not recognize these situations under the tort law, then really defendant could potentially find a way to stop third party contract being effectively being carried out but escape liability because the contract was not technically breached. When the contract is not technically breached, that instance no one can bring an action against any liability is concerned. The overriding principle of this phenomenon of the contract was seen in the Torquay Hotel Company Limited versus Cousins. This case law, which will enumerate how tort law would be there and what the malaise would change the tort law. The defendant were a union and who in a dispute with the claimant hotel declared it to be black as in the blacklisted, and this had the effect of preventing the hotel's oil supplier ISO from being able to deliver oil since it employed the member of the union as a drivers. In effect, this means that ISO is the petrol bunk name, like Meru, ISO, I'll come. So, in the same manner, ISO could not fulfill the supply contract it had with the hotel. However, ISO had a force majeure term in his contract stating that it would not be in breach of a contract if it was prevented by from carrying out the obligations by and against amongst other things labor disputes are concerned. Thus, although the defendant had acted with the intention of the making a breach of a contract and had effectively accomplished their goal by harming the hotel's oil supply. They technically had not caused any breach of contract. Participants, are you hearing me? Let us go further. The court held that this was so obstacle to him to a claim of inducing breach of a contract, and the court summarized the three essential elements of the tort. There must be interference with the execution of a contract within it that interference does not result in a breach. So the interference must be deliberate and that interferences must be direct since there been elements existed in the case of the hand at the hand and the tort had occurred despite the existence of the force majeure elsewhere. The force majeure means act of God. Thus, the tort induces a breach of a contract, finds itself a relatively old place, and will try to induce it because they want to know what is the price given in the lowest price given in the tender. Even 1 paisa also makes a difference. The tort requires harm that the harm does not necessarily come in the form of the advertised. So, in the advertisement will be there, harm will not come because the people will not read the inner meaning. That's only the thing. So, whereas odd in the theory, the noted as noted above, this enables, see here the cursor, it enables this law to appropriately deal with the situation in which such a defense would be, yes, such a defense would be where we missed. The law appropriately deal with the situation where the defendant causes the practical effects of the breach whilst failing to cause the breach of the traditional contract term, just as the law recognizes that sometimes a failed attempt at robbing a bank, a failed attempt at robbing bank can be a dangerous as a successful attempt. Tort law makes the same a dim view of the failed attempts to induce breach. So diminished chances are there, then naturally the damages are less. But everybody aware of it and intentionally did act, then the damages are more. So regarding the knowledge is concerned, the defendant's knowledge that their action will cause a breach of a contract is not enough to demonstrate the intent. So there must be evidence to show that the defendant primarily aim was to blame. Yeah, primary aim was to cause a breach of a contract, not blame, rather than that being a secondary effect of an action with an altogether different intent. This can be seen in the OBG versus Allen case law. It was observed. Now let us see the next case law, that is the in focus OBG Allen. The defendant took a control of the failing claimant company as a receiver. It later emerged that the appointment was invalid and thus the control of the company was illegitimate because when it is not transferred. Whilst in the control of the company, the defendant managed some pre-existing contract, like the company had an inquiry which involved them being breached. Yeah, being breached. The claimants thus argue that the defendant had induced a breach of contract. So the claimant contention is that he induced the breach of a contract, but he should be proved over there. If they fail to prove it, yes, we can file a case against the person who filed a case against you for the breach of a contract. Participants, are you there with me? Where are you? Whenever I ask you, you have to unmute and read. Okay? Okay, sir. So this claim failed. The receiver had been acting in a good faith, having been told by the another organization that they were rightfully appointed as the receivers and had merely managed the contract as any competent receiver would have. And because their primary intention was not to cause the breach, the claim failed. So knowledge of the other contract does not need to be particularly detailed as per, the JD Stanford and Son Limited, Lindley. The defendant were a union and who is an illegitimate attempt to negotiate with this claimant barge operators. Told their membership they refused to take the members board Brahma. Yeah, the barrage told the members to refuse to work on the claimant's barrage, thus causing them to fail to meet their obligation to their clients. Okay, but other people also have made a contract with them to use the same pathway. Whereas it could not be said that the defendant had a specific knowledge of the term of their employee's contract that they are always seeking to catch. Yeah, they are always necessarily enough to know that they were causing some sort of the contractual breach. If you go further, you will understand the tort is also one of inducing a third party away from the contract they are already in, rather than the putting an end of offer or on the table when the third party is merely considering what deal they will take. Okay, this can be witnessed in the Allen versus Flood case law. It is 1898 appellant court. Or here the apparent court, the defendant, a trade union, told an employer that its member would not work alongside the non-union workers. So union workers, non-union workers are there. So you will not allow the person who boycotted or who did not attend the duty, irrespective of the trade union. So all of the workers are employed on a day by day limits as to reach worker essentially enter into a new contract with the employer each day. So the employer was thus presumed to get rid of the non-union workers, else it would be lose the services of the union workers. The union workers then sued the union on the basis that the union had caused them to become unemployed. This was unsuccessful. To contract had been breach since the non-union of the workers were re-employed and each day. So the union had this only plan, pursued the employer to not to contact with the claimant again, whilst the claimants might have had an expression, then they would consider me as a okay, because participants, let me ask you the question. Otherwise, there is no meaning of just my reading without explanation and your participation, and it will not be a participatory class, it is a one-way class. What do you say? Yes. So exam consideration, let us see that. As you will have noticed by now, union action features heavily in the case law surrounding the tort. So, however, it is worth being careful when they're dealing with the recognized unions. They can often take the action that, if done by any other party, would be purely illegal. In short, be wary of the quickly stating that a union has acted illegitimately. Furthermore, don't assume that the actors taken by the defendant union in the cases above and below are indicative of what as union can and cannot do nowadays. There's a different. There's it no. That this is itself its own topic under the heading of the labor law. Now, participant, can you unmute and read that what I highlighted on the screen? Damages required. That is, damages required. It is not enough for the defendant to have a merely induced a breach of contract, and the claimant must show some loss has stemmed from the action by such inducing the other person. However, this does not necessarily mean that quantifiable loss needs to have arisen from the breach of a contract. So, if it is enough that a quantifiable loss are arised, even though there are less people in the economic law or in any subject is concerned. So, thus, in exchange of telegraph company versus Grigori and company, what happened in this company? There is a first Queen Bench 147 case. The defendant company induced a third party. Why he induced the third party? To give its stock information. How much the stock is there, how much is there, even you have taken it, of course. With the lawful means they entered and taking over the company's concern. So the defendant company induced a third party to give its stock information in breach of the third party's copyright agreement with the claimant. He is not supposed to disclose any trade secret to any opponent. If does so, and he is made a breach of duty towards the place where he worked or working. The claimant could not be said to have lost anything. They were prohibited in law for providing the information to the defendant for sale or otherwise. So, such information will not be revealed because he is the employee of a different company. At that time, you cannot induce it to know any trade secret. Regardless, the court found that the infringement of the claimant's copyright property fulfilled the damage required for the tort. So now let us see the defenses what are there. A defendant can argue that their action was justified as a defense to the first to this tort. However, the bar for advancing the defense is understandably high so as to avoid the eroding the utility of the tort. Thus, in South Wales Miners Federation versus Glamorgan Coal Company Limited, the defendant, yes, still 2 minutes, the defendant union asked their members to only work intermittently at their employer's coal mine, effectively a partial strike. The miners were paid on the basis of the current ratios. Yes, the miners were paid on the basis of the current price of the coal. The defendant union argued that in doing so, they were reducing the supply of coal, and thus the country will not flourish when there is a lot of breach would be there. So increasing the price. How the increasing the price? The defendant union argued that in doing so, they were reducing the supply of the coal and increasing the price. So supply is less and increase is more. And to the benefit of the both its member and the mine owner, in essence or in justification for their atrocious action is concerned, let the 50% made with the kusuk. What is that? So now the defendant union argued that in doing so, they were reducing the supply of the coal and that increasing the price. So the supply is less, the price is more. The supply is more, the price is less. It's a universal principle. To the benefit of the both its members and the mine owners, in essence, a justification for the atrocious action. So there should be a justification for the action should be there. Otherwise, it cannot be taken as a defense. At pleasingly novel, at this argument might be failed. Thus, in noted example of the illegitimate strike action being held by that justified that the Brimilo versus Casson case law, it is CS 302. The defendant union represented the chorus girls working for the theater manager. So the defendant union represented the chorus girls working in the defendant union manner in an attempt to have its members party. They want to know the members the paid properly. It pursued a number of threats to break its contracts with the manager. Whilst this constituted the inducement of the breach, the defendant argued that they were justified in doing so. The chorus girls were paid to the detail that many of them were forced to supplement their wages and via prostitutions, and their argument succeeded. The same claim failed. So this is the thing would be there when such a thing is there. The women workers will be becoming prostitutions for their livelihood. So better it should be stopped in that manner. Whilst this constituted an inducement of a breach, the defendant argued that they were justified in doing so. The chorus girls were paid so little that many of them were forced to supplement their wages via prostitution. The argument succeeded that the claim failed. So a particular form of justification can be employed when the defendant can demonstrate that they are exercising the right which trumps that of the claimant. So this is illustrated by the Edwin Hills and Partners versus the First National Finance Corporation, that is a 1989 case law. WLR, what is meant by WLR? Participant, anyone can unmute and say, what is meant by WLR? Weekly Law Reporter. The defendant lent money to a developer to develop some land. This meant it was a secured creditor and thus they had a right over the land. The claimants were a firm of architects who also had a contract with the developer to work on the land. The loan lapsed, thus giving the defendant a right to call on its debts. This would have resulted in the defendant taking over the land, and that the claimant could have had their contract terminated. Okay. Instead, the defendant arranged for refinancing the detail, part of which involved the developer appointing a new firm of architects and thus dismissing the claimants. The claimant sued for the inducing a breach. Yes, within 5 minutes it can be closed. The claimant sued for the inducing a breach but failed. The defendant action was justified since it has a right to effectively and claimant contract by calling on their loan. Instead, it had been less economically destructive path for ensuring the development went ahead. So our Cisco begs at any time it will stop. So let me stop over here. Then asking the students why you did not open it and speak over there. Whether you are there or there is a problem of the Matanda, that is the Wi-Fi. So what is the problem? You should have to make it out because in our class today we dealt with the economic thoughts, how the when a thought is committed over there, what is the economic analysis would be adapted and which method that we have to compensate to the victim. So that we have learned today. And in the beginning we made some glimpses regarding the contract as concerned. Later on we switched over to the thought where the economic theory would be will be available over there. So that is the reason we can say the contract is liquidated damages and the tort is liquidated damages, which is that means liquidated damage means that damages which are ascertained by the or agreed by the party before the breach occurs. But unliquidated damages comes only at the time when the wrongdoer did a particular wrong, whether it is a civil wrong or a criminal wrong or whatever the wrong would be there at the time that we will use it. And it is merely the breach is not there, but it is the negligence part of it, and hence we can say that in the law of tort, it is a right in rem. In the law of contract, it is a right in personam. The right is available only to the person, those who are party to the contract. But in the tort, it is the right against the entire world. So if anyone causes any injury to it without justification, then he will be compensated, even though the loss occurred to is not that much more also. But there is a breach of the fundament, there is a breach of the right is occurred over there. That is enough to claim the things. Even a nominal damages are awarded, but awarded. So with this, I would like to stop with the today class. Then we will see in the tomorrow again. If tomorrow, in the sense the next class, I wish that everybody should have to present and pass the information to the other one. And today class also that I posted in the WhatsApp group and alerting that I will start my class. There is a third session exactly by the 5 o'clock to 5:50. And now the time is 3:39 roughly. Yes, 3:39 at any time. Sorry, no, not 5:39. It is 5. Yeah, at any time our WebEx will stop. So if you want to ask any question, that you can ask me so that I could give the reply to your question. And later on that we will meet it the next class. Asante sana na shukuru sana, Mungu akubariki na kukulinda. Bye. Have a good day. Mungu barikini. Okay, bye.
Mungu ibariki Afrika, wabariki viongozi wake, hekima, umoja na amani. Hizi ni ngao zetu Afrika na watu wake. Ibariki Afrika, ibariki Afrika, tubariki watoto wa Afrika. Mungu Ibariki Tanzania, dumisha uhuru na umoja wake kwa waume na watoto. Mungu ibariki Tanzania na watu wake. Ibariki Tanzania, ibariki Tanzania, tubariki watoto wa Tanzania.
Asante sana na sikiliza mimi darasa online. Mungu akubariki na kukulinda.